Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the DSSGx Summer Program Datafest. That's a mouthful to say, isn't it? On behalf of the Warwick Business School and the University of Warwick, we're really thrilled to have you here. Well, data science, which encompasses machine learning, deep learning, and now the increasingly hot topic of generative AI, has completely transformed the world. It's changed the way we acquire information, the way we learn, the way we think, the way we process information, the way we solve problems, and how we do business. Almost every business is looking at how to leverage data science to improve the business. Unfortunately, the playing field is not level because implementing effective data science solutions requires expertise. It requires resources. Not everyone has them. And that's an important gap that this DSSGx summer program is trying to fill. So the cause of what we're trying to do here is really a noble one, trying to level the playing field. Well, University of Warwick is one of the leading research universities in the UK and a proud founding partner for the Alan Turing Institute. Our approach to data science is very interdisciplinary. So it's the best of statistics, best of mathematics, best of computer science and business, of course. In fact, we have folks representing different departments in Warwick here today. Well, in terms of analytics and data science, at the university, we offer a variety of degree programs in analytics, and they span the entire university. As the protein for research, I guess I should introduce myself first. I should have started with that. My name is Ram Gopal. I'm a professor in the Warwick Business School. I also serve as the protein for research. So in that role, my remit is to look after all the research that happens in the business school. So for us, a point of pride is that we were the first MSc program in business analytics worldwide. Right? And since we started, many other programs have emulated us. Right? So as they say, right, imitation is the best form of flattery. Right? But we're not staying put. There's a lot of new exciting things that are happening with our programs. One question you may have is that why is it that Warwick is so keen to host the DSSGx summer program? The reason is it aligns well with our vision, with our expertise, and with our ambitions. Now, with respect to that, when it comes to our ambitions with respect to teaching, our mission is to have research-led teaching, and our mission is to have experiential teaching. There's nothing better than the DSSGx summer program. Right? So we bring the world's best aspiring data scientists and throw them at large-scale societal problems. Right? And it's not just theoretical. Okay? It's very practical. I'm sure all the participants would agree that when you go through this program, you get all the practical aspects of a data science project that's implementable and that's practical. Right? It also aligns well with our mission for engagement, external engagement, and for impact. Okay? Oftentimes, universities are accused of being very insular. Right? The academic world is different from the real world. Okay? Our mission is to engage externally better, and there's nothing better than this program. Right? So what our students deliver is of use to organizations. And it's practical, it's implementable, and it's also open source. Yeah? It's available to anyone worldwide. Right? So it aligns really well with our vision, which is helping to transform our region, country, and the world for the collective good. And there's nothing better than the DSSGx program for that. Yeah? So I'm eagerly looking forward to hearing about this year's accomplishments. I would say prepare for an inspiring afternoon as we delve into the wonderful world of data. Okay, so that's it from me. Without further ado, let me hand it over to Professor Jürgen Branca.
Good afternoon, everyone, and also from my side, a warm welcome to this Datafest 2023, where we celebrate and showcase the achievements of this year's Data Science for Social Good program. In my short presentation, I want to tell you a little bit about the background of DSSG and why we are running this program. The program has been created already 10 years ago by somebody called Raed Ghani at the University of Chicago. You see his image here. And it is a very intense 12-week summer program that takes some of the world's best data science students and brings them together with charities and government organizations to tackle data science problems with a social impact. It aims to deliver usable, industry standard open source data products that can directly help our project partners in their day-to-day life. It is highly interdisciplinary, problem-driven, and teamwork-focused, and so it equips the participating fellows with all the key skills that will allow them to excel in their future career. Such a program, I think, is incredibly important for several reasons. Once, it makes the power of data science available to charities and government organizations who often don't have the funding and the expertise to make use of this new technology. Bram has already mentioned that it's not a playing level field, and DSSG helps to level that playing field, and by doing so helps to achieve positive social impact and make the world a little bit a better place. Second, for the students, it equips them with enhanced practical data science skills that they need in much better, I think, it can equip them much better than any normal university program, because it's really hands-on, it's very intense and collaborative and diverse, etc. So it's a fantastic program for them, and it's shaping tomorrow's elite in social data science. And third, it creates a community of like-minded people and organizations who care about the society and who are willing and able to use their skills in an ethical way. So in 2019, the University of Warwick and the Alan Turing Institute teamed up and decided, well, this is such a fantastic program, we want to bring this to the UK. And so we created DSSGx UK. And we've been running it every year over the summer since 2019. Even COVID couldn't stop us. We did everything online. So this puts Warwick into a growing global network of organizations that run similar programs, including Carnegie Mellon University, where Raed is now located, Stanford University, University of Washington, University of British Columbia, to mention just a few. Over the years, we have worked on a variety of projects, from helping homeless people to processing environmental complaints, from monitoring foster agencies to identifying irregularities in government procurement. We have worked with a wide variety of project partners, from small charities to large international organizations, from local councils to government organizations at the other end of the world. And also this year, we have been lucky to work on a number of interesting projects with a variety of partners. In the project with United Learning, we try to help students reach their potential. For UN-RED, we identify areas at risk of deforestation. We've worked with the Algorithmic Transparency Institute on issues related to greenwashing. And the last project, which is about identifying students at risk of becoming not in employment, education, and training, we even have 5 project partners, 4 councils, and the EY Foundation. So 4 exciting projects, and I'm sure you're all looking forward to the presentations by the individual project teams later on today. The 4 project teams this year consisted of 4 fellows each, selected from about 550 applications we received in a very thorough process. The selected fellows come from 10 different countries, and they have studied a variety of different degrees, obviously AI and data science, but also social science, business analytics, economics, psychology, and engineering. That diversity in terms of nationalities, in terms of backgrounds, I think is part of the exciting features of this program, and allows us to look at problems from very different angles. The fellows are supported throughout the summer by project managers and technical mentors who provide guidance in everything from time management to teamwork, from version control to software testing, and of course the basics of data science and ethics. These teams have worked incredibly hard over the last 12 weeks, and we'll soon see the results. Now, today is the highlight and closing session of this year's program, our Datafest, where the fellows will showcase what they have achieved over the summer. However, what you see today is only the tip of the iceberg. What you can't see immediately is the year-round, and I really mean year-round effort, that is needed to keep this program running. It starts with advertisement. We need to make the world aware of the program so that they apply as fellows, they want to work with us as technical mentors, project managers, that they want to do projects with us, right? So advertisement is the first step. The program, I think, given the benefits, is great value for money, but still money is required to run it. So we need to secure the money required to run this program. A lot of effort goes into project scoping. So we talk to many potential project partners, often charities with relatively little experience in data science, trying to help them define and scope a project that is suitable for DSSG, that can be done in 12 weeks, that is interesting enough, challenging enough, that has a social impact. So a lot of effort goes into that. Then, of course, the selection of the fellows. I mentioned we have about 550 applications. We go through a very thorough process. There's a paper-based round first, and then we have two rounds of interviews looking at the technical as well as the social aspects of the fellows. We value not only academic excellence, but also industry practice. And so we often recruit our project managers and technical mentors that support the students on a daily basis. We recruit them from industry. So that recruitment process has to be done. We need to sign legal contracts and data sharing agreements with all our project partners. And only after all that, really, this intensive 12-week summer program can start that culminates in today's Datafest. You can imagine this is a huge amount of work, and we wouldn't be able to do this without the help and dedication of many, many people who volunteer their time and expertise. There are really too many to name individually, but I would like to point out at least a few. The team of academics, so the organizer team, Long Tan Tran, Maria Bazzi, Martin Plummer, Christian Robert, Colm Connaughton. So we do all the background work, the project scoping, etc. And Claire Roberts has done an amazing job as our program manager, working with many other people at the university in finance, in recruitment, with the legal team, with the development team, and all these contributed. And last but not least, we have many, many volunteers, often previous year's fellows, who help a lot with the project scoping and with the review and interviewing of the fellows. Good. Finally, I mentioned the funds needed to run such a program, and it wouldn't be possible without the really generous support of the university. It's a multi-department endeavor. There is the Department of Computer Science, the Department of Mathematics, the Department of Statistics, And this year in particular, with a very strong support, Warwick Business School, who have all contributed to making this happen and to support this program. I have to say, I'm really proud to work at a university that puts so much funding and effort into such a program. I would also like to gratefully acknowledge support by the London Mathematical Laboratory and the Alan Turing Institute, and I would like to thank Aridia for allowing us to use their secure data platform for free. So thanks to all these organizations. Now, to give you an outlook on the rest of the afternoon, what follows is the keynote by Sir Bernard Silverman. Then we have a talk by Oliver Fiala from Save the Children, who will reflect on a project that we did with Save the Children last year. And then, of course, what you're all waiting for, the project presentations of the projects that we did this year. And after that, we will invite you to join us for a reception and poster session where you can ask lots of questions and interact with the fellows directly. OK, that's from me. Now it is my immense pleasure to introduce to you this year's DataFest keynote speaker, Sir Bernard Silverman. He is a statistician, was professor at least 4 universities, including Oxford, but also worked in government as chief scientific advisor to the Home Office. He was knighted in 2018 for public service and services to science. And today he is going to report on some of his work to fight modern slavery with data science. Sir Bernard, I'm looking forward to your talk.
It's fantastic to be here, and I've been working in data science before it was ever invented as a topic, and so I'm a statistician, but what is that except a data scientist? So I'll reflect on that a bit in a minute. I'm going to talk about Florence Nightingale to start with. Florence Nightingale, as you know, was a great pioneer in the use of data for public good, and I will explain some of the things that she did. I will actually, of course, make a throwaway remark, which is that the person who's done the most public good by using data science is XTX Markets, because the owner of XTX Markets, who uses data science for investment, paid £500 million in tax last year, and that's done that's funded a lot of hospitals, schools, roads, etc., etc. So that's another way of doing good, but I haven't done that. Sorry about that. So I'm going to talk about statistics and modern slavery and data in ways I'll discuss. But one question I'm going to raise later on is, what do we do with data that are not very reliable? And how reliable is the data that I'm going to talk about modern slavery? And how should we treat data and statistics that are of dubious accuracy? So my underlying task here is to make you think about what you should do when you have data which is a bit fishy, is not quite right, but nevertheless is important. And I'm going to try and explore that. There will be no answers, but this is intended to help you think a bit. We can talk about it later. And this is nothing new, because Florence Nightingale used statistical arguments to address really important issues. But actually, as we'll see, it's a bit unclear whether her work was evidence-based policy or policy-based evidence. And does it matter? And we'll see that she was wrong in many ways, and maybe reflecting on her work gives us some guidance for problems of today. So how can statistics, data, however inaccurate, contribute to public policy? And Florence Nightingale really realized how important it was to use data to make your point. And that was her lifetime's work, really. She was very interested in this sort of thing. She was able to manipulate lots of people to do important things and so on. Was it evidence-based policy or policy-based evidence? We'll see. She had very strong opinions, that's for sure, about the way that things should be done. So I I don't know if some of you will have seen these pictures before, but this is a very, very famous early example of data science. So what's this all about? Nightingale, there was then, as now, the Crimea was contested territory. And during the Crimean War, which was awful in the 1850s, Nightingale was interested in what was going on there, and there was enormous mortality. Now, this is, I don't know if you can read at the back, diagram of the causes of mortality in the army in the East. And there are two pictures here. Sorry, does this do, that's it. This is April 1854 to March 1855, and this is the following year. And these are sort of histograms, and she invented these. They're called rose diagrams, but it's a histogram in polar coordinates. So she invented a modern, new way of displaying data. This wasn't done using R, and let's see what she said. So it says there, the areas of the blue, red, and black wedges are each measured from the center, blah, blah. It tells you what they are. And the blue wedges, this bit, is the deaths from preventable or mitigable zymotic diseases. The red wedges, which is, I think, that bit, from deaths from wounds, and the black, the deaths from all other causes. So what this demonstrates is that most people that died were dying of disease, not of enemy action. And in the following year, that's not so. So by the following year, everything had got much better until we're going to see what happens, why. Now, what she did, so it's all, she wrote a book, it's only 16 pages, and I've invented that tinyurl.com, FN Crimea, you can read that. And it's rather interesting. And she wrote it, but she didn't, it was typically, in those days, you didn't, nowadays you all want publications. In those days, you pretended you didn't write it. You sort of just let it out there. And now, what did she say? Now, this is what can happen to an army by neglect of the laws of nature. So what she meant was that this was how she found things when she got there. And she felt that they weren't obeying the laws of nature. And this is what we may expect from their observance. And we'll see in a minute what she did. And basically what she did was introduce all kinds of sanitary reforms to the way that people were treated in hospitals and so on. And it made a fantastic difference. So she would advocate for more and better data science, but she made big jumps of reasoning when it suited her. So the diagram is based on a range of published data, but I won't read this all out. But she said that, in fact, if you read between the lines, there was an enormous amount of, I don't know how you would put it, cleaning up the data was done. And the other thing that was great was this. She said it was really important that the statistical element should be effectively introduced in the Army Medical Department where anything like sanitary progress is possible. In other words, we need data scientists. That's what she was advocating for, the Army to employ proper statisticians, data scientists who would do these. Now, the big jump was this. These were the data for the war, but then she said, you could do the same thing for towns in unimproved states, and even for single buildings. Nature is the same everywhere, never permits her laws to be disregarded with impunity. So there was an enormous generalization from one thing to another. Well, what did she advocate? She believed in something called hygiene, and this was all about foul air and the miasma theory of disease and so on. And so that they did things like open all the windows, improve the drainage, cleaning the hospitals and so on and so on. But they did not do it because they believed in contagious diseases. She, in fact, did not believe in contagious disease. That's what is quite interesting. And so she said, if only doctors understood the need for, it was spelt in those days with an accent, of hygiene, then instead of all this nonsense about contagion, we would be much better off. And so her view was that she was demonstrating why the contagious disease theory of disease was wrong, and what was right was fresh air and all that kind of thing. We know that the reason is it worked despite the fact she didn't believe in contagious diseases. Cleanliness was obviously a good idea, but not for the reason she believed. And so it's quite interesting that she was peddling her view of what was going on was the opposite of what was actually going on, and yet nevertheless she did what was right. So even though she was wrong, she used the diagram as her start of campaign for public health legislation, and she created the 1875 Public Health Act. She actually wrote it. It's long before women had to vote or anything like that. She knew how to manipulate people. And it was all against opposition from the medical elite. The doctors didn't like it because they said, oh no, it's all about other things. All this, what she's talking about, is nonsense. And in fact, it did things like saying that houses should be connected to drainage and all sorts of other things, which made enormous differences. And it saved the lives of millions of people, and arguably set in, I mean, there's been, ever since then, improvements in public health over and over again. And because I'm not a doctor, I can say that statisticians have saved maybe more lives than doctors. That's not quite fair, but you know, well, it is actually probably true. But it's better if we work together, isn't it? And there was astonishing improvements in life expectancy long before modern scientific medicine. That's actually the point to make, that the data was what made the difference. No one really understood the causes properly at all. As an interesting piece of data, by the way, the expectation of life, residual expectation of life for people of my sort of age, did not improve between about 1875 and about 1950 or later. It's quite interesting. If you got to the age I am, which I'm not going to publicize, you can look it up, you were just as likely to live to be 90 then as when I was a child. It's enormously improved since then. And the reason is, of course, that all these things didn't improve cancer and heart disease and so on, which are the things that kill old people, but they made an enormous difference to the things that kill young people, epidemics and so on. So that's an interesting reflection on Florence Nightingale. Now I'm going to talk about modern slavery. Well, what is modern slavery? It's many different aspects of human trafficking and exploitation. So modern slavery encompasses many aspects of human trafficking and exploitation, and here's some examples. So it can both mean captivity within a family, it can mean people who are inveigled into sex trafficking or labor trafficking, debt bondage, horrible things. All of it's awful. In the United States, they use the term human trafficking because they want to distance this from chattel slavery, which they used to have, which was everywhere actually, and because of the legacy of what used to be called, what is called slavery, they don't like the term modern slavery, so they use the term human trafficking. It's not quite the same thing, but it's more or less the same. So when I talk about modern slavery, some people use the phrase human trafficking. Now, what happened? How did I get involved in this? I used to be the Home Office's Chief Scientific Advisor, and one day Theresa May's office rang me up and said, we'd like to talk to you. And I said, have I done something wrong? And they said, no, we've got something. So they said, we're going to bring in a law against modern slavery. We want to bring in a new law, and we were the first country in the world to do this, a law specifically against modern slavery. It's not about making things illegal that were legal, but bringing everything under the same umbrella and having potentially a life sentence and so on. And we would like you to try and find out for us how many offences there are. And there was very little data on it. Now, there was a thing called the National Crime Agency, and they collated data on relevant offences, and they asked for returns from various agencies, which can be grouped into these groups. The idea is, and they had 2,744 cases on their books. So the best guess was that there were 2,744 cases. However, we'll see that's not so. And so what did we do? Well, the problem is something called the dark figure. And in any situation like this, in any crime like this, so, you know, domestic violence, child exploitation, so on, so on, there's always a big figure you don't know about. So it's not the same as, say, murder statistics, because we actually more or less know exactly how many murders there are. But we don't know how many victims of modern slavery there are. Why? And I've put a whole list here. It's a hidden crime, and there are many reasons why you can't do it. So victims may still be under control. They may be afraid to come forward. They may be ashamed that they did something they don't like to talk about. Professionals who identify them may not realize, and they may not even realize themselves that what was done to them actually amounts to modern slavery. And finally, if you ask for data, you don't get it. So you ask agencies to tell you things, and not everybody responds. But what we tried to do was to think of a way of estimating the dark figure of potential victims that didn't come to attention. So I'm going to just tell you a bit about that. And it's all to do with what's called mark recapture. So the idea is you've got fish in a pond and you want to know how many fish there are. So you go fishing and you catch 100 and you mark them all in some way and throw them back in the pond. And then you come back a week later, you go fishing again, you catch another 100. And if there is 20 in common in your two catches, then your best guess is that there are 500 in the population. That's a standard approach. It was purportedly introduced by someone called Peterson in the 1890s. That's not true, it's much older, and it's a well-known idea. And it's actually used in census. So when we had the census in 2021, following the census, there's a thing called a census coverage survey, which is they do a survey and then they try and see how many people are in the survey that were in the census, and the overlap tells you what the undercount is. So that's used, and that's the idea. Now, with the modern slavery data, there were more than 2 lists, and there were in fact 5 lists, or well, there were a lot of lists, or hundreds, but we put them into 5. And so what we did with the 2,744 cases was to see how many fell into the various lists. So that's the LA list. So that says, well, hang on. So there are 695 cases which appear on list GO only. On the other hand, there are 11 cases which are on PF and GP. That's police force and general public. And there's actually 1 case on the first 4. There are 5 lists here, so there are 32 possible combinations, and any which are 0 I've left out. Of course, the one we want to know is what's called a dark figure, which is the one which you don't observe at all. So the ones that are not on any list, and that's what you're trying to estimate. Now, an enormous amount of work went into this, and my colleague had to sit in the National Crime Agency going through all the files for a very long time, checking, because when we decided to do this, I spoke to the people at the NCA and I said, well, what I'd like to know about those victims is why you knew about them, and I want to understand the pattern of duplicates. And they said, oh, no, don't worry, there aren't any duplicates, we've removed those. I said, yes, I thought so, but we want to know, why did you remove them? And so it was necessary to, for example, find out that there were 11 duplicates there. And Olivia, my colleague, had to go through every file and work out the history of each data point. And by the way, it's all so sensitive and confidential that I wasn't allowed to know any more than this table. So we had to promise that only she would know what was going on exactly. And that's actually not because I was considered untrustworthy, but it's a general principle, very sensitive things. If you don't want people to know something, don't tell too many people. Politicians know that too, which is why when anything is said in the cabinet, so many people gets out, even beforehand. So there you are. Okay, so that's the idea. And what you can do is then fit a mathematical model. And don't worry, I'm not going to put the mathematical model up on the screen, but I can tell you later, which predicts the dark figure. And this is a model. It's called multiple systems estimation. And it fits main effects, interaction effects, and so on. You don't need to know too much about that, so I won't waste your time, your energy now. But it basically says, it works out what the probability of being spotted if you're in one particular list or beyond list overlaps 2, 3, 4, and so on. And this is the answer. So if you apply the method to the data, you've got a confidence interval of 10 to 13,000 victims, and that suggested that we were aware of 20 to 25% of all the potential victims. It's very tentative, and it's based on assumptions that actually aren't really valid, but not unreasonable. What I will also say is to skip to the final point, which is the confidence interval is conditional on the model selected. And this is typical of much data science. You make all sorts of assumptions, and then you make a conclusion which is conditional on all the different assumptions you've made. Some of the assumptions are visible, like the model selected. Others are sort of swept under the carpet. We have to understand that. So that was where we were. And what happened? Well, I was amazed because it got front page coverage in all the newspapers. And the newspaper which reported most accurately the scientific report I wrote was the Daily Mail. So the Daily Mail not only published the figure, they all said there are 13,000 victims and the Home Office is terrible because it only knew about 2,744. We knew they'd say that. But the Daily Mail also put a quote from me that was essentially this. It was essentially those words, and it said Professor Silverman said, and it was reported in full. So they reported the caveats as well as the result. Other newspapers just reported the result. And it facilitated the passing of the Act, which I was very proud of, I suppose. And it also provided a spur to action. And for years afterwards, the police and people like that would refer to this figure and say, this is a serious crime. This is how many victims there are, and we need to do something about it. And I can remember being in a meeting where they said, well, we know that there are 13,000 victims. We haven't found them, and we know there are because Professor Silverman said there were, and I was sitting there. They didn't know I was there, and I put my hand up, and I said, well, actually, you may believe that figure. I don't. But anyway, there we are. Now, there's now enormous public consciousness of the issue. You've all heard of modern slavery, I imagine. I hadn't ever heard of it. So interestingly, you have all heard of modern slavery, and it's partly because of the work we did and partly because of the passing of the Act. And actually, this is the only way that we will ever eliminate this. The first step is raising awareness and consciousness. There's enormous public consciousness, and far more victims have come to light. So it's clear the figure's very conservative. And I'll just say, because it's what I'm working on at the moment, which is all the stuff about the model choice we can now do something about. But there's a whole interesting question around that too. You see, if I had produced a confidence interval which actually took account of the model choice, it would have been very wide. And so it wouldn't have been 10 to 13,000, it would be something like 8 to 40,000. And if I'd published that, people say, so you don't know anything, do you? And so there's a very interesting question as to what you should do ethically. Should you say, well, I've taken every possible error into account, and so all I can tell you is it's between 1 and 1 million? Or you can say, well, if you make some assumptions, and I've written them down on page 97 of the paper, then there's between 10 and 13,000. Which is right? Well, if you're trained as a statistician the way I am, well, we'll come to this in a minute. So that's really the sort of thing I want to think about. Here's 2 examples of impact. One is something that came through my letterbox in Westminster about eliminating modern slavery. And it's all about, we're running sessions on eliminating modern slavery. It's incredible. I mean, this is how much consciousness was raised. And then the other is Oxford University's modern slavery statement. And every big company and organization has to provide a statement of what it's doing about modern slavery. And that's actually an interesting data science project to be done, which is to analyze all these statements. So if anyone wants to do that, I'll talk to them afterwards. But the fact is, of course, one of the presentations is on greenwashing. There's obviously people say they'll do all sorts of things, they don't do them, but nevertheless, it raises consciousness. It means they start thinking about their supply chains, they start thinking about their employees and so on. So it's pushing all the time towards improving the situation. This is the number of referrals to the national referral mechanism year after year after year. I don't think there's any more modern slavery now than there was 10 years ago. It might be, but I don't think so. But there's certainly increased awareness. And I will say something else, which is that some of the work was criticized on the grounds that the sort of thing I just said earlier, that there were too many assumptions. And I was a bit upset about it. And 5 friends of mine, I wrote a paper that was criticized quite strongly, and 5 authors, not me, wrote this. They wrote, the statistical argument is simply a brick in the foundation of an informed and effective response. So all these things that you're doing, it's a brick in the foundation of an informed and effective response. I just want to quickly talk about something called the Global Slavery Index, which is produced by an organization called Walk Free. And they produce this amazing website publication. It's worth looking at. It's a bit, however, they attempt to predict the number of victims in every country in the world. And they claim there are 3 times as many victims in the UK as there are in Germany, which I just don't believe. It's not possible. We're too similar to Germany for there to be 3 times many victims. But their model says it. And why? Because they do something with what's called vulnerability measures. So what they do is they take a load of surveys. They ask whether people or their family have been subjected to forced labor or forced marriage, and they get an overall world total. And then what they do is they do a regression model, very complicated Bayesian regression model, where they look at characteristics of countries. So there's lots of variables they use, and they find that these vulnerability variables are correlated with the survey totals. And then they use the vulnerability measures to predict the actual number. Now, in fact, if you do that, you get very, very wide confidence intervals, very wide prediction intervals. So here's an example. The prediction with individual countries is extremely wide, and they don't publicize this. It's in a background paper, which is quite hard to get hold of, like from less than nothing to 4 million. For the UK in 2018, a prevalence estimate of 0.38%, that's 4 victims per 1,000, with a standard error of 3. So again, it's from, and similarly, and then 5 years later, the method has given you half the answer. So, it's a bit fishy, but there you are. I believe their approach is better at identifying risks and vulnerabilities than it is for estimating prevalence. So here's there are about three discussion points, three slides. On the scale of hard to count populations, on the scale of difficult problems, this is very difficult. That's what I'd first of all say, because it's even harder to count than many others. So this multiple systems estimation stuff was actually used a lot in things like working out how many deaths there are in conflicts, how many intravenous drug users there are, how many people in various minorities that don't want to identify themselves, and so on. We've educated people, as statisticians, you're not most of you, to expect a point estimate and a confidence interval. And that's why I'm concerned about the Global Slavery Index point estimates, and why I insisted on reporting a confidence interval, not an estimate, when I did my original work. And it's very easy to criticize figures or models anyway. So if you come up with a number, people will always criticize it. And that's what I was talking about earlier. So that's just to bear in mind. And so I thought about this, so I was writing this talk, and I realized that there are two different ways in which we use data. So on the one hand, we use data, and a lot of modern statistics was built up for things like clinical trials, agricultural experiments, process control, where the question is this new treatment better, safer, cheaper, et cetera, than the old one? Is this effect really there? How much effect does this have? These are really important questions. And then there's the public policy question. Do we need to worry about this? Does it matter? So if you're going to do clinical trials and agricultural experiments and process control, then you really do need the whole mathematical, you need randomized controlled trials. So I know this has been recorded. I once taught Theresa May out of conducting a randomized trial. So the Drugs Advice Committee wanted to introduce there's something they wanted to do, and she wasn't very happy. And she said, well, can't we do some sort of controlled trial? And what she meant was we would make something legal in Manchester, but not in Liverpool or something like that, and then see what happened, which is not stupid. It's a very clever idea, but it wouldn't work, because what you do in one, and after I said, you know something, I don't, and she looked at me, she said, no, you're right, we couldn't do it. So she said, I want to monitor what will happen. We'll do it, but I want a report on what happens. I thought also sensible. Anyway, so all this apparatus, you need it if you're doing that. But if you're doing public policy, maybe a rough estimate's enough. This is because it's completely against everything I was trained. It's a diabolical thing to do, just to pull an estimate out of the air like this, but maybe it's sufficient. So what should be our ethical position? Should we say nothing until we can say everything? Or should we state clearly the modeling assumptions, and maybe clearly, as I say, means on page 97, and rely on George Box, who was a great data scientist, who said all models are wrong, but some are useful. Florence Nightingale was wrong, fundamentally wrong. Just as well she wasn't running the Medical Research Council, because she just didn't believe in bacteria, contagious diseases. She didn't think disease was caused by bacteria. And she never saved the lives of millions and millions of people. Climate change. Now, we all think climate change is scientifically understood. It isn't. It is in broad terms, but if you ask what is the effect of X amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the different models give enormously different results. But they all say, you know something, this isn't a good idea. And so roughly speaking, and the thing is about climate change is about the laws of physics. So you have something to build on, whereas social things, which are what most of us here are interested in, are about people. And so it's going to be very, very difficult to nail things down. And so we've got enormous numbers of people thinking about climate change and have done for many years, and we understand it much, much better than we did 20, 30 years ago. But there is still a lot not known. And is there any analogy with our statistical conundrum over modern slavery? And so the question I leave you with, and I haven't given the answer, is how can and should statistics and data, however flawed, influence public policy? Thank you. And I'm sorry I've kept you away from your later bit anyway. Yeah.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you very much, Sir Bernard. Yeah, for showing what data science can do, the power of data science, but also for asking some very critical questions. So that was a very, very nice talk. I know we are pressed for time, but maybe the audience has one or two questions that we...
If you don't worry, because we can get on the next thing. I'm very happy if you want to ask a question. I'm very happy.
Let me ask one. So you have this nice example of fishing, taking 100 fish out and then throwing them back in. You don't want to throw back in criminals or so. How do you deal with that?
Oh, I see. No, the point here is that you have different catches. So you're catching fish twice. So what we're doing is catching, these aren't criminals, these are victims. We are spotting victims in two different ways. So we're saying the victim is in that list and in that list.
But is that not, because it's like you catch fish once with a net and once with a line, and
yes,
very different fish catch on. So
there you are. This is exactly the point. I think you're making the point for me. This is why the data, exactly, yes, exactly. And then there are the fish that hide under stone and never come out, and so on and so on. And so on. And this, you see, this is fantastic, because you are exactly making, you're raising all the right criticisms, and yet this is exactly my point, that what do we do? So we could either say, what did I say? Say nothing till we can say everything, or state our assumptions. And so I think actually thank you, because it's very helpful. But yes, you're right. So the assumptions are not, you can write down mathematical assumptions, which are that every case, that there's a model, that every case has a probability, which is mu plus alpha I plus beta I, but the assumptions are not valid. Exactly. No. Yeah.
Okay, so two more questions, Dimitro, and then...
You want to both ask the question and I'll answer them together. So you speak first and then you, so yeah.
Right, so with Nightingale example, how do we know that it's not a survivor's bias? Like, this is an example where it worked, but what if there are plenty of other examples where such approach didn't work?
Right, and what was your question?
So I just wanted to reflect on the ethical position.
Yeah.
So if we look at the problem as a sequential decision-making process, actually statistical data results, it's just kind of like a feedback on what actions, next action to do, right? So I think it doesn't really matter, and I agree with you, it doesn't really matter whether it's very accurate or very wrong, but if with them we can choose the right action to learn the optimal policy on the long run, that's the way to go.
Process control. Right, so let's talk about the survivor bias thing first. Yes, in other words, is it just that it happened that it made a difference? Well, in this case, and also, could it be that something else made the difference? So could it be that all these things that she did weren't the reason? But they obviously were. I mean, you know, so and it was just simple things like washing your hands before you saw the next patient. You know, it was just cleanliness. It was you know. So but you've made the point. She had this data. She liked the data. It made the argument she wanted to make. So she published the data, and it led to the Public Health Act, which saved the lives of probably hundreds of millions of people. So we don't know. And your point is, again, yes, so you're talking about the way you should use statistics, I think. I think that's more an example of sort of this kind of thing, isn't it? That's where you're in a situation where you can actually use your data deliberatively, and you know, you then are in you have control over what you've got. I think the other problem with the modern slavery data is that we just had to use the data we could find. We were not able to control the process, and that actually comes back to your point. The data was collected for other reasons, and so and we are often in that situation where it's not that you can design an experiment and go out and collect the data. It's that here is some data which we can use. What should we do with it? But I mean, you've both raised, all three of you, have raised exactly the problem that I see. And yet, a lot about the data science revolution depends on really opportunistically doing things. So really, this discussion will run and run and run. But I'm glad I've made you think about it, which is what the point was of the talk, really. So yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
you again. Now, every year we do some fantastic projects, and it's very nice at the DataFest to reflect back and see what happened with the project that we did, for example, last year. And so I'm very glad that Oliver Fiala agreed to talk today to us about what the data science project we did with Save the Children last year, how it has impacted his organization. So, Oliver.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and thanks for having me. And what a great introduction into our daily conundrum and where we're operating. So I'm working at Save the Children and leading a small data and research team within the policy and advocacy department. So our job is exactly that second bit, right? We're not looking at our programs. We're not trying to estimate if they're most cost effective or so on. We are trying to raise problems. We're trying to make policymakers aware of issues, aware of solutions, and trying to get some attention sometimes to drive them to do the right thing. So really interesting reflection on a lot of daily discussions. And I want to share a little bit what we've done last year, what the fellows did last year for us, and how that informed some of our thinking and our abilities. Just to, apologies, there's a little bit the formatting going wrong, but just to motivate a little bit the problem and the issue. So we estimate roughly that there are, we can talk about the estimates and about the confidence intervals, but we have roughly an estimate that 1 billion children living in poverty, in child poverty. It's something we are measuring, not actually using incomes, because children are not supposed to earn really money, but we're measuring it using multidimensional poverty. So are they deprived? Are they lacking access to nutrition, to health services? Are they not going to school, and so on? So it's 4 out of 10 children, right? So it's a crazy number. And it's very basic definitions of, are you getting enough nutrition? Are you having access to improved water sources and to a toilet and so on? And we know those kind of estimates from household surveys. So we are focusing, as you can imagine, a lot in our work on low and middle income countries. A lot of the data systems are not as mature as in high income countries, but a lot of the countries have actually pretty good household surveys, right? So every few years, there's a lot of money being put in, and you interview 30, 40, 50,000 people, depending on the size of the country, and ask them mostly about health issues, some education issues, sometimes some issues on child protection and other issues. And those surveys are usually national representative, and they give us a relatively good estimate of prevalence, for example, on a national level, and usually they're representative on one subnational level down. So in many countries, those are states or regions or provinces. But that's kind of it, right? They're sampled surveys, and you can't go really far down, and you can't really have a granular understanding. And that's exactly what we're kind of lacking, right? So we know there are first a lot of differences in the world, but we also know there are a lot of inequalities within countries, and we would like to highlight them a bit more. And we can do that a little bit by saying, that province has more poor children than another province, but we're really lacking this detailed understanding of where exactly are pockets of poverty and of deprivation, and how do those kind of deprivations overlay, for example, with climate risk, with conflicts, and with other problems. So that was kind of our problem we started with, and yeah. What we need is therefore a much more granular understanding of the distribution of child poverty. Now, poverty maps are around for a long time. They exist, I think, it's 80s certainly. The World Bank is doing loads of them, almost exclusively focused on monetary poverty and not on multidimensional one, which, as you could imagine, much more complex, right? If you have a lot of different dimensions you might be deprived in, it's much more complex than, are you having less or more money? So we wanted to address that, or we wanted to, figure it out generally. And we were hoping that machine learning approaches can help us to predict that. And we're not in a position to do that, or at least we were not last year. So we were really grateful having that project being picked up by DSSG and had great fellows who worked with us on that. And I took this picture from their report, and they will be much better to explain the technical background behind that. But basically, the idea is you have some of those survey data. They are georeferenced, so you know roughly where they are. Some kind of privacy displacement of the coordinates. And then you have like all these different inputs, satellite imagery, geographic information, critical infrastructure like hospitals and schools, connectivity, GDP. You take all of that, try to build a machine learning model and try to predict, and then you check it against some ground truth data. In our case, that was basically some of the household survey which was withheld to test afterwards how well it predicted. And the fellows did a fantastic job developing that for Nigeria and a couple of other countries. And we afterwards actually kept working with one fellow and expanded it to the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa. And then we have something like that, which when I shared that on Twitter, and we haven't properly launched it, but it got a lot of excitement. But basically, we're having across Sub-Saharan Africa, we have an understanding of prevalence, so the percentage of children which we consider multidimensionally poor, as well as of depth. That's the green bit. So how many dimensions they're deprived in? Like, are they someone who is only deprived in one dimension or in 3, 4, or 5 dimensions, for example? And the height of those bars is the population. Right? So those kind of information and the ability to understand that on a much more granular level is fascinating, right? It's fascinating for us to think, to challenge ourselves. Are we working in the right area, in the right locations of a country, for example? But it's also from a public policy point, like, are we actually understanding enough the inequalities we see between countries, like and within countries, like between different parts of the country? So that was the solution we got out of that. So I was, as I just mentioned, we are still very much at the beginning of like getting some of that stuff out there. So we finished it like early this year, expanding it to the wider region. We had a remote session, which we organized because we had those kind of inputs at the World Data Forum, something the UN organizes every couple of years. And we brought like loads of people together from the World Bank, from UNICEF, from UN Women, and loads of organizations to talk about innovative approaches to measure poverty. And we presented those kind of results there. We shared the approaches with other organizations, UNICEF and UNDP, for example, where the fellows presented their results and had technical discussions. And not, obviously those kind of findings in itself are amazingly important, but also just having the ability to have those conversations and actually to engage in a more technical discussion is extremely valuable for us. And we started using those findings for analysis and research, especially as we start now to link child poverty with more climate risk and look how they overlay. Are children living in poorer regions, are they more affected by climate risk? In the next step, we want to start looking at a bit of causality as good as we can. So it sparked a lot of interest and a lot of analysis. And coming up, we are planning we are revamping a bit our data work. We're having a shiny, exciting new platform coming out, which we call the Child Atlas, where we basically draw a lot of the data we think is relevant to look at children, health data, education data, poverty data into one platform to give users in decision-making a bit of an easy-to-use tool, but also the ability to compare, like, are those areas which have high health issues, are those also areas which are not investing enough in health? Are areas where we see high child poverty levels, areas where we see high climate risk, for example. And we will share all of that on that platform, and based on the early kind of sneak previews, I think hopefully gets a lot of interest. And that's what we did so far. And as I said, like, very much still looking forward to the next few steps and very much not done with it. So thank you again. And it was a really great project and really great experience.
Okay, so then we come to the final part, which is the projects that we have done this year. As is customary in our Datafest, these will be relatively short presentations to the point to tell you what they have done, what the potential impact is. And then there will not be any questions, but instead, afterwards, we'll invite you for a poster session and reception where you can talk directly to the fellows and they can explain the methodology behind what they have done, and you can clarify any questions that you might have. So I hand over to them.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keerthana Krishnakumar, and I'm really excited to share with you the data science solution that my team and I have been working on for the early identification of non-higher education outcomes. But first, let's take a moment. Look at where we are. We're at DataFest, at the Shard, here to celebrate our love for the work that we do. We had some great presentations reminding us of that. How did we even get here? Maybe with something like this? I'm sure we all remember our school days of studying for long hours, worrying about whether we're going to make the marks that we need. And more importantly, even if we do get high marks, will we actually achieve our goals? I think it's safe to say that most of us here turned out okay. But there can be bumps along the journey. In fact, 4 out of 10 students meet sixth form requirements, but don't actually manage to join. This means that since sixth form is a prerequisite for higher education and training pathways, these students might not be able to go on to that, even if they would like to. So why does this happen? Well, that is the question of our wonderful partners, United Learning, who is interested in finding out about this. They believe in the best in everyone, both staff and students, which means equipping their staff as best as they can to support students in achieving their future career goals. So in particular, they're interested in this project to identify students who are likely to perform quite well, however, might not achieve their future goals. However, this is a task that's easier said than done. United Learning has over 60,000 pupils spread across 93 schools, and they only have about 50+ career leads to support these students. That is where we come in. We helped United Learning come up with a 3-step process to first identify the students by predicting the likelihood of them going to sixth form using a gradient boosted decision tree model. Then we identified the students who are high priority, those who perform quite well, but might not make it to GCS, might not make it to sixth form. And finally, we look at common features across these students who are high priority to help United Learning identify early targeted interventions to support these students. So let's go back to our hardworking student and see how this works. United Learning was kind to provide us with a wide range of data sets with information about school, pupil characteristics, their marks, and more. With this, we were able to first predict the likelihood of whether they'll go to sixth form. So for this student, maybe we can say that's about a 40% chance. Then we identify whether the student is likely to perform well. And they are, according to what we see here. So this student is classified as high priority. Now, we want to understand why. So we look at the student's characteristics. So here we can see that the student is pupil premium eligible, which means that they might not have the means at home to help support them in their studies. So knowing this information, United Learning can now develop a targeted intervention to help these students. But this is just one student. United Learning has over 4,900 pupils who are currently entering year 9, and we were able to come up with insights for all of these students. So now the question is, how did our model perform? And luckily, we reserved a portion of our data set in which we can test and calculate how well our model was able to identify students who did not actually manage to make it to sixth form. And the results are pretty good. Our model was able to identify 4 out of the 5 students who will not make it to sixth form. So knowing this, we know that there can be immense impacts. We are able to identify over 800 students for whom United Learning can now have direct, actionable interventions to support. These forms of support can range across 6 forms. So not only we talked about pupil premium earlier, but also with other characteristics like special educational needs and more. Moreover, United Learning can apply these insights at 8 different levels of aggregation. So United Learning can provide resources or interventions at the school level or local authority level, so geographical levels, or by filtering for school type, Ofsted ratings, and more. So with all of these insights, our students' situation can change. Now they're no longer alone. They might have a career lead who is equipped with the insight to help them achieve their goals. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you at the poster session.
So, hi. The Amazon biome is home to around 40,000 species of plants, 427 species of mammals, 1,300 species of birds, and 400 species of amphibians. However, the lives of all of these species is endangered because of 1,400 trees that are being cut down in the Amazon rainforest by the minute. A very good afternoon to everyone present here. We are the team responsible for predicting deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. Our project partners are UN-RED, and we are glad to have them both here. UN-RED is a collaborative organization that strives to reduce emissions and deforestation effects in developing countries. The main goals of our project encapsulate forecasting deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon region, identifying the key drivers of deforestation, and then visualizing our findings through an online Google Earth engine-powered application. Naturally, such a demanding problem necessitates the fact that we were not the first to think about it. There has been a trove of previous work done, and we scoured through a lot of this literature in the past. What we observed was that the work done in the past had low flexibility, provided poor performance results, was not as flexible, and provided less control to the features, as well as provided low control over the features produced. We came up with a solution for that. Our solution does away with these shortcomings and provides a whole new solution, which is highly flexible, provides better performance results, has the ability to forecast into the future, provides better feature control, and offers a lot more interpretability. What makes our model so separate from the others in the past? What are our features that make it so special? Well, our features are our features. We categorize our features into three broad categories. These categories encapsulate provocative features, or features such as pasture quality, basically areas which are being grazed upon by cattle, and mining areas. Inhibitive features are those features that include indigenous and protected areas where deforestation is not permitted, as well as human activity-borne features like proximity to recent deforestation, forest edge density, and distance to roads. Our model workflow incorporated pre-processing around 10 terabytes of geospatial data, feeding our results into a deep learning-based unit model, obtaining model predictions, interpreting our predictions through a feature ablation technique, and then deploying our predictions and our interpretability results to the Google Earth engine-powered application. The results for our model can be observed as follows. So through this map, the green areas represent the regions that have no deforestation. The yellow regions represent areas that have minimalistic risk of deforestation, whereas the orange and the red areas would indicate regions that have a high risk of deforestation. Another way of measuring the results of our model could be through a quantitative examination, wherein we have compared the performance of our unit model with random forest, which is another machine learning-based model, and JNR. JNR stands for Jurisdictional and Nested Red Plus Standard, which is the official UN-RED benchmark. As you can see from this figure, the normalized root mean squared error of our model is lesser as compared to the two other benchmarks. This stresses on how our model performed better than the rest of them. Another important component of our goal was to interpret the results of our model. We employed a feature ablation technique, wherein each feature's impact was deprecated and then tried to represent to the model's predictions. Based on the feature ablation technique, we found out that the three most important features were pasture quality, distance to roads, and distance to recent deforestation. Basically, anything indicative of human activity means deforestation is taking place. We incorporated our interpretability results and our prediction results to a Google Earth Engine-powered application. The Google Earth Engine-powered application also provides scope for carbon accounting, wherein we multiply the carbon biomass of a particular area with the deforestation taking place in that area, so as to give a rough estimate of the loss in carbon tons. You can also come to our poster session for a live demo of our application, and we would love to see you there. Summarizing the impact of a project includes being able to predict deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon region now, the ability to interpret our results, and then deploying them through our Google Earth Engine-powered application. We were also able to introduce carbon accounting and enable our partners to develop targeted policy decisions. Our team and I are hopeful that our tool would be really useful for you in Red, and we would be able to conquer deforestation. The Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed. Thank you very much for your time.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manan Suri, and I'm here to talk to you about a project that my team did, which dealt with the detection of green messaging and an exploration into greenwashing. So before we begin, I would like you to picture a company. This is a petroleum giant which releases large amounts of emissions into the environment. But when you look at their social media, what is it that you see? You see pictures of the 5 windmills that they have put up. And this leads us to discuss a pertinent issue in troubling environmental times like these, which is greenwashing. Greenwashing is the act where a company presents its environmentally pro actions in a better light and ignores or sidesteps the unsustainable activities that a company does. And while you might think that this is just dealing with messaging, it has long-term impacts. Because one, it misleads consumers into thinking that they're making a more sustainable choice. And this erodes trust. Secondly, it wastes resources because these resources could have better been utilized in dealing with the deep-rooted challenges rather than superficial solutions. And thirdly, it deters genuine efforts because companies who are actually trying to do good, the spotlight is taken away from them, the incentive is taken away from them. But despite all of this, detecting greenwashing is hard. We need to look at different factors because it's a multidimensional problem. And to boil it down into 2 simple factors, you need to look at the kind of image that the company is projecting. Because that way you can see whether they're trying to portray themselves as green or how green they're trying to portray themselves. And then you need to compare it to their actual environmental performance to see whether there's a balance between both of these. But this is hard because the bottom line is that there is no quantifiable baseline to discuss any of these ideas. And therefore, we frame our goals in the following ways. Our first goal is to detect green messaging because we believe that in order to see what is a narrative a company wants to put forward about itself, we need to look at the green messaging that a company does. And our second objective then is to compare the amount of green messaging that this company is putting out on social media with their actual environmental performance to get a better idea about how transparent their environmental messaging tactics are. To do this, we collaborate with the Algorithmic Transparency Institute and environmental communication specialist, Dr. Jeffrey Supran and Dr. John Cook. Together, we look at fossil fuel into sectors because they cause major pollution and harm. And specifically, we look at oil and gas, aviation, as well as automobile industries. How our partners currently analyze green messaging and greenwashing is that they use a tool known as Junkipedia to fetch posts from 5 different social media platforms. They then use these posts and label them manually with the help of research assistants based on a taxonomy that's been developed by them. An obvious pitfall of this method is that it is simply not efficient. You could do it for 1,000 posts, but it won't scale in terms of analysis when you want to analyze millions of posts that are being put out every day by these companies. And this is where we step in. We automate this process, and to do that, we train machine learning models based on the data that has already been labeled by these research assistants. We take a social media post, we separate the image and the text component from that post, and train independent models for both of these. Based on these models, we infer categories about the kind of content that's being projected through that post. So that content could be green, non-green, none, or an other or ambiguous category when it doesn't fall clearly into the other categories. Our modeling process involves iterating through different combinations of pre-trained models, which provide strong representations for the text or image that we're inputting into the model. And once you've got these strong representations, we need to see how they can be fine-tuned to the specific task that we're performing. And to do that, we build sophisticated neural architectures that correspond to the hierarchy of taxonomy that we are dealing with. To evaluate how well our model is doing, we section off a set of data that has already been labeled by the research assistants. Then we ask our model to make predictions on the same set of data, and we measure how close the human labeled data and the model labeled data was. And on several metrics, we perform really well. But what do we do with a model that's performing really well? In this case, you get new data coming in every day on social media. And now you can use this model to categorize that data into the categories that we have talked about. This can then be used to do an analysis of green messaging on an account level, an organization level, or a sector level, which empowers us to compare the green messaging with the environmental performance. And this has tangible impacts. So one, it creates transparency for consumers, because through analysis of these kinds, you're able to better see how a company performs and make better decisions. Secondly, it moves a step closer to accountability for organizations. It provides them an incentive to perform well in terms of their green messaging. And lastly, we open source the code so that individuals like us can also monitor and continuously track what these companies are doing. This is my team. And we believe that through conversations like these, we are better able to navigate the complex landscape of environmental messaging. We believe that now is the time that we make green decisions that are truly green. And our future depends not just on what we say, but what we do. So we need to take sustainable actions, and that starts when we say no to greenwashing.
So hello everyone, I'm Nazifa Muzammil and I'm here at the Datafest with my incredible team, and we have with us representatives from our project partners. Thank you so much for joining us all today here. So what brought us together here is this innocuous acronym NEAT. So what is NEAT? Anyone from the age group 16 to 24 who's not in education, training, or employment is called as NEAT. Now why might NEAT be an issue? In the year 2022, 4.5% of the students for the age group 16 to 17 were categorized as NEET. Now you might think that 4.5% is not that dramatic, is it? But it increases to 14.5% when the age group of 18 to 24 comes there in England. And here is where the things get worse. The NEET individuals remain disadvantaged in their level of attainment even after 10 years. They're at a 50% higher risk of going into depression or anxiety. They're more likely to work. There's a chance, 2.5 times more chance for them to work in low status occupations when compared to their non-NEET fellows, and they're 2.8 times likely to be economically inactive. Now that we knew the problem at hand, this is where the team NEET jumped in. Our main goal was to create a data-driven solution in order to predict the students who are potentially becoming NEET, mainly for the age group 16 to 18, so that the councils could provide effective and efficient interventions to those in need. In order to fulfill this goal, we had a three-step process. The first step was to identify the data sets and build a processing pipeline. For that, we got data from the councils. Thank you so much for that. But not just that, but we had some government level data on the internet, which made our model more robust. The second step was to develop a predictive model for decision making in order to flag a student as NEET or non-NEET. Lastly, our project wouldn't have been complete without providing our project partners with a dynamic space where the data comes in alive as the visualizations, the dashboard. Now imagine that you are a council member. You might want to predict if a student is NEET or non-NEET. You have three options you can opt for. The Rooney tool, which is currently used by most of the councils. You might want to go with the NEET 22 model, which is the last year's DSSG's team model, or you might want to go with our solution. So hypothetically taking a number of 32 of NEET students as well as non-NEET students in your council, if you use the Rooney tool, you might be just able to predict 5 out of those 32 students as NEET. And you might wonder why the other box is empty. It's just because the Rooney tool is a manual tool which does not operate with the non-NEETs. So you might wonder if you just switch to the NEET 22 model. Here, you'll be able to flag 17 out of those 32 students as NEET, which is a better accuracy when compared to the Rooney tool. And because it's an automated predictive model, it would look at to the non-NEET students as well. But this year, we've made it even more better in terms of accuracy, and now you can flag 24 out of those 32 students as NEET. But these are just mere models, and models are prone to errors. There are 2 types of errors that you might face when dealing with this issue. The first thing is if the student is actually non-NEET and you label them as NEET. As a council member, this is an issue for you in terms of resource allocation and money, because it is not required in the first place if this is the sort of misclassification you have. This is a misclassification that the Rooney tool does a lot, and the last year's team tried to mitigate these numbers and they were successful in doing it, but we've done it even better. But this is not where it ends. There's another type of misclassification where a student who is actually NEET is misclassified as non-NEET. Here's where the individual misses on the resources and the level of support they actually need. So here again, the Rooney tool does a lot of misclassifications. The last year's team reduced these numbers by quite a well as well, but then this was a major source of focus for our project as well. So we have reduced this even more. And this is where it comes to the F2 score, because we have laid more weight on these missed NEET students, along with the wrongly predicted NEET students and the true predictions of the NEET as well as the non-NEET. So we've managed to improve the F2 score by more than 20% when compared to the last year's model as well as the Rooney tool. So moving on to the insights, these are some of the features that our model has labeled as the most important ones that might cause a student into going NEET. The GCSE attainment scores, the unauthorized and authorized absence rates, the level of support, whether the student receives free school meals, and special education needs. Not just that, but the school to home distance as well as the deprivation indices of where the student lives might also be a reason. Moving to the heart of the matter, the impact. The solution that we provide allows no student to fall out of the net. It looks at each and every individual throughout the process and allows the councils to provide effective and efficient interventions to those who are in the need. And there's a potential to scale this project at a national level that might help mitigate the NEET students in England. So moving on to the horizon of opportunities this project has. The project can be refined using data sets from other councils, and the prediction performance can be improved by data augmentation and more feature engineering. Given that the model sees all the data and the diversity of the data set, it might be able to develop a better and a more robust approach towards ethics and bias. And lastly, more centralized school level data can be used to upscale the project nationally. So this might be an end for us, but a start for somebody else. Thank you so much. See you at the poster session, and do not forget to join us for the live demo of the dashboard. Thank you so much.
Wow. I mean, I have seen all these presentations, and I'm still amazed at the work that you have done in these just 12 weeks and the enthusiasm with which you present your work. So really, really well done. Thank you very much. Also, if you would like to work with us in any way, if you would like to do a project with us in the future, if you would like to act as a technical mentor or a project manager with DSSG, or if you're interested in being a fellow, or you know people who may want to participate in DSSG as a fellow, feel free to talk to us. All our DSSG staff has this written on the name tag, so either it says DSSG staff or DSSG fellow. Feel free to talk to us and ask your questions and approach us. And as I mentioned before, financial support is also very important for DSSG. It is a relatively expensive program to run. It is amazing, but we need to have the funding. And so if you can contribute, if your organization can contribute, if you have any idea about where we could get funding through some funding agencies, some calls maybe that we are not aware of, we would appreciate any pointers in that direction so that we can keep this program running. It's been running for 5 years, but it's a struggle every year to get the funding. So yeah, any help is appreciated. Please feel free to stay in touch. We have an internet website, warwick.ac.uk/DSSGx. And you can always email us at dssg@wbs.ac.uk. Thank you very much for joining us today, and enjoy the reception and poster session. Thank you.